Live subjects? Wendy spat on the ground at Raphael's feet. You're fucking insane, you sadist! Raphael merely adjusted his shirt cuffs so that they were more neatly aligned with the sleeve ends of his lab coat. That sentiment rather loses its sting, considering how many times you've said it, he said in that quiet, bored voice of his. Although, let's be honest, we all know I never cared what you think. Raphael, please. Teddy, as always, was the one to try to appeal to their former colleague's non-existent sense of morality. We've already done so much of what you've asked of us, sacrificed so much. The patchwork of lesions still fresh on his pale, sweating skin attested to that. You can't ask us to vivisect. Threnody could see the tears starting to form in his eyes at the very thought. God's sake, Raphael sighed impatiently. Such children. I predicted you'd be difficult about this, but I have to admit I'm still disappointed. He brushed a wayward lock of wavy golden hair back from his face. Really, I get the feeling you're only rebelling because of me. I mean, honestly, you've all dealt with the living far more than I have. Living patients, for fuck's sake, yelled Wendy. People with injuries to treat, diseases to cure, not fucking test subjects. We only did our research on actual cadavers. You fucking well know this. For all her anger, Threnody noticed, Wendy was remarkably still. Her eyes blazed with her words, and the sound of her voice was almost a physical force, but she was in deadly perfect control of her body, just as she always had been. Well, from here on out you will be expanding your horizons, Raphael shot back, his voice raised, his words clipped. He took a step toward Wendy. She didn't so much as flinch, but only continued glaring at him. For almost a full minute there was a stale silence as Raphael and Wendy stared each other down, broken only by the occasional shuffling and weapon clicking of Raphael's raider guards as they kept their guns trained on the three apprentices. Finally, Raphael broke away, instead turning and giving a sidelong glance to Threnody. And what about you, Threnody? Threnody narrowed her eyes when he spoke her name. He only lifted an eyebrow inquiringly. Not going to register your indignation? A steady glare was his only response. Threnody was not lent articulation by righteous fury like Wendy or by reasonable compassion like Teddy. All she wanted to do was scream. Well, that and to hit Raphael. And keep on hitting. Behind her back, her hands, bound by manacles, clenched into fists. There was a smirk on Raphael's face as he started to approach Threnody. Really now, Threnody, I'm surprised you have nothing to say. You always seemed to like talking to me before all this. Threnody fought hard to keep her expression neutral, but she couldn't stop her breathing from quickening. She could feel her heart pounding quickly in her chest as only one thought now circled around her mind. What if he knows how I felt? Almost instinctively, she strained her wrists against her restraints. They were old, makeshift, rusted. They were bonds good enough to hold the average malnourished wastelander, but not her. She was strong. She'd had to be to survive her own premature birth, to kick her way out of the shed that collapsed on her when she was small, to survive the plague that had ravaged her hometown. Raphael didn't know how strong she was, how much stronger she had become as she'd trained in secret in her cell at night. She could show him right now, break the manacles, close her hands around his neck and squeeze until the life was gone from him, and with him, all the fault that lay at her feet for being too naive and infatuated to see through him from the start. But the guards would kill her before she could even reach him. She worked to steady her breathing. What is it, Threnody? Raphael whispered, leaning closer. Don't you mind what I'm asking you to do? Get away from her, you sick fuck, said Wendy, her voice dangerously low and even. Teddy, standing between the two women, turned his mournful gaze on Threnody. Sensing this, she glanced towards him, and he gave her the ghost of a sad but comforting smile. Raphael stood a moment longer, a foot from Threnody, then shrugged and paced back to the doorway. You two could learn a thing or two from your sweet little sister. She knows there's no use complaining. He turned back to face them, folding his hands behind his back in a businesslike manner. I really would rather not have to tell you to comply with my wishes, but you appear to be forcing my hand. Again," he added with a touch of affected exasperation. Wendy took a deep breath in through her nose and out through her mouth. "Teddy, Threnody," she looked over at them. "Don't let him make you. I don't care what he does to me. He can break my whole arm. He can tear the damn thing off. I don't care. Nothing is worth this. I don't want either of you to go along with it either. No matter what experimental viruses he exposes me to, I can handle it, I promise." There was a short silence, then Raphael looked expectantly at Threnody. "What? Not going to tell them I can go ahead and shut you in the safe again?" "You can," Threnody said quietly, trying not to think of how abjectly terrified being shut away in such a tiny space made her. She looked over at her two friends, and her gaze softened. "They know that. They know how I feel." A small, sad smile was shared between the three of them. For so long Raphael had preyed on their devotion to each other. They had grown up together, after all. They were like brother and sisters. There wasn't anything they wouldn't do for one another. For the past 5 months, that was how he had controlled them. They did what he told them in return for ending the torture he was inflicting on their surrogate siblings. But now he had discovered a line they would not cross. Now, instead of protecting each other, they would endure the torture for each other, and for the sake of doing the right thing. They, at least, were starting to harden to all the ways Raphael would hurt them. Better they take their punishment than to have so many lives end in excruciating pain. But the dangerous smile spreading over Raphael's face made it clear he had other plans. Slowly he started to walk forward. "Though I really don't understand your reasoning," he said softly, "I do somewhat admire your resolve. And here I thought I'd already seen all your camaraderie had to offer. Sadly," he sighed, coming to a halt squarely in front of Teddy, "friendship is not even remotely a viable research topic, and it does not interest me." He placed a hand on Teddy's shoulder. Teddy did not recoil at his touch, but his jaw did clench. "Dear, gentle Teddy," said Raphael, "you've always cared so much about doing the right thing, haven't you? You struggled a lot these past months, I know, constantly weighing your morality against your empathy, never knowing the right balance. I know it's even more exhausting for you than it is for the others." Teddy kept staring levelly ahead, looking past Raphael. Threnodi's fingers twitched behind her back. "Stop it," said Wendy, her voice quiet and lethal again. Raphael just glanced casually over at her before returning his gaze to Teddy. "Oh, that's not to dismiss how hard it's been for you and Threnody as well, Wendy. You all do make it so difficult for yourselves after all. But you know as well as I do that Teddy here has the most bleeding heart of all of you. So I'm going to make it a bit easier on you." An amused smile played across his lips. Teddy, his mouth set into a line, continued only to stare straight ahead. "You'd like that, wouldn't you? To have some of the burden alleviated?" Wendy opened her mouth to speak again, but Threnody got there first this time. "Leave him!" she cried out. Raphael just raised his hands in affected defeat. "As you wish. My, so sensitive." He swiveled on his heels, straightened the lapels of his lab coat, and strode to the door. "Escort them back to their cells," he told the raiders lazily. "Since they insist on complicating matters, I suppose they all have some thinking to do. Well, 2 of them will, at least." He slid open the door. "Wendy, Threnody, you have a choice. Either cooperate tomorrow, or Teddy dies." And without looking back to see their reactions, he left. Threnody lay on her threadbare mattress, gazing up at the ceiling of her cell. She and the others weren't kept within sight of each other, but she could hear the soft sobbing coming from Wendy, and the dull thudding sound of Teddy repeatedly knocking his head against the wall. The tears spilled from her eyes, hot and stinging and furious and forlorn. She moved her hands, and the chains that attached them to the wall jangled. She needed to stop crying. She had to be able to see clearly. It had to be somewhere in the small hours of the morning by now. None of them had slept, of course they hadn't. Wendy and Teddy's soft tones had pleaded back and forth before fading into the relative silence of what could be their last night together. Threnody hadn't been able to think of anything to say. She just waited, trying and failing not to cry. There were no guards posted to them throughout the night. Threnody wasn't sure, but she suspected Raphael had them patrol outside the Chandri to keep any outsiders at bay. Raphael had always wanted the Chandri for himself. Now that he had it, it made sense that he would guard it jealously. There was a door leading outside in what used to be the loading bay back when the building had been a candle factory. It led to a sheltered corner outside. If they were quick and quiet, they could hover undetected for a moment and look for a gap in any perimeter Raphael might have set up. Then they could bolt, out into the night and away. Whatever came next didn't matter right now. They just needed to get out. A last tear dripped from Threnodi's cheek down onto her ear, and finally the crying had stopped. Threnody blinked to clear away the last of the moisture, wiped the dampness from her face, then pursed herself up and off the mattress. Her chains clanked obnoxiously, dangling from metal hooks that had been hammered firmly into the wall. Everything about this prison that Raphael had forged for them was so makeshift, from the rusted manacles to the ill-fitting bars separating her from the rest of what had once been a treatment room. Threnody felt her lip curl in contempt. Raphael didn't feel even remotely threatened by them. No matter what horrific things he forced them to do, he felt assured that those homemade cells and handcuffs would hold them. And for months they did. But now Threnody was desperate. She grabbed the chains that restrained her hands and wound portions of them around the bars as best she could. When the chains were taut and tangled, she drew a deep breath, clenched her jaw, clasped her hands together, and yanked both arms away from the bars. A scream of pain threatened to escape from her, but she stifled it, breathing heavily. She tried again, and again, and again, and again. The heavy manacles bit into her wrists, and blood started to weep through her skin, but the links that connected the chains to the manacles were starting to warp and strain, and finally they snapped. Threnody bent over double, panting heavily, aching and shaky, but with her hands free. It was as though a fog that had been inhabiting her mind was lifting. She could do this. The pain was such a tiny thing, and the reward was so great. Expression grim, she drew herself up and aimed a powerful kick at the bars.